Representative Robertson. Can I ask, did you sign in?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay.
And I said I wasn't going to speak, but I changed my mind after hearing some of the testimony.
I'm lost in sign up
Well,
sheets. Thank you.
I'm Timothy Robertson. I'm a member of the House. I represent Cheshire 3, which is the city of Keene. One of the problems with a lot of things in life I've discovered after 70-odd years are myths. And one of the myths, for instance, is that it matters how much marijuana you use. It doesn't. Marijuana goes to a completely different part of your brain than alcohol. There are receptors which only react to THC, and there are only so many of them, and once they all get full, that's as high as you're going to get. So if you keep puffing and puffing and puffing, you are not going to get higher. You're as high as you can get. And it upsets me some that the Attorney General will send somebody who doesn't understand that. That's science. The other problem with myths is those of us who don't do marijuana have gradually over the years accepted the same terms that we use with alcohol: high, stone, etc. Now, some of us who grew up in the 50s when we were trying to keep up with the gentlemen who came back from World War II and were teaching us how to drink in college because they were a few years older, and we tried to consume all the alcohol that the manufacturers were producing, certainly learned what stoned was and high and out of my mind, and we also learned that some people could drink themselves right to death, and we're reading about that even today in the paper. This is not true with marijuana. There have been experiments, there have been studies in other countries and in this about the effects on driving. Car and Driver, a very well-known magazine, expert on automobiles, quite often rents racetracks to test automobiles. Back in the days when they had a more liberal management, this would be at least 20 years ago, they rented a racetrack, the racetrack assuming they were going to be there to test the new automobile, and they indeed were, but they were also testing the effects of getting high on marijuana. They went out and tested before they smoked, established their best times, 3 or 4 drivers. They then went back to their, they called it a trailer, and smoked marijuana. They found their times actually improved. They don't recommend driving on marijuana because you get very easily distracted because your eyesight and your hearing and your other senses are much more alert and you are easily distracted. You know, boy, I didn't notice how yellow that yellow was, and I didn't know
Sir,
how square.
Could you speak specifically to the bill?
I am talking to the bill and the,
wrap it up.
well, if I'm going to have to speak to the bill, then others who gave you false information, as which I am refuting. In England, they took 10 marijuana users and said, we'd like to follow you for a month. Just act your normal life. They found that when these people were using marijuana, and marijuana smokers don't do it every day, they do it when they're in the mood, when they're not going to work, and they found that they avoided driving because their common sense part of their mind is not affected by marijuana. They don't do things that are socially unacceptable like we do when we're drinking alcohol. and I don't, maybe if you haven't experienced that, you probably could find a friend who has. And when they were forced by a situation to get behind the wheel of an automobile, they found they drove slower and they drove more safe. And I think those kind of facts ought to be brought out, not by people who, because they have a title on their door, don't do any reading, don't do any research about the real marijuana. And one of the problems is it's illegal to do research. It's illegal to do testing. How can those who are not out in the real world talking to people who will tell me things, because I'm not going to arrest them or follow them around to see who their supplier is, how are they going to find out when the federal government makes it very, very difficult to do any kind of testing, any kind of science on this drug? You're welcome.
Questions? Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Richard Tomasa? Good morning.
Good morning. Doctor, my name is Richard Tommaso, and I'm here representing the Libertarian Party. I'm sure already in following me, most of my talking points have already been addressed or will be addressed by more qualified people. Just one point I really wanted to bring up that I've been hearing in prior debate is that passage of HB 648 would send the wrong message to society, especially to young people. And I have to ask what message the law is sending now. The message is saying that the state will put sick people in jail for following treatment under a doctor's care. And I'm asking how would our citizens, how could they possibly interpret that? And would they be asking, is that justice? And how does that foster respect for the law, respect for our government, which I'm sure many of you know is actually faltering. As happened yesterday, I was reading The Law by Frederick Bastiat for a book club I'm in. I came across a passage, just one paragraph. It says that society cannot exist unless the laws are respected to a certain degree. The safest way to make laws respected is to make them respectable. When law and morality contradict each other, the citizen has a cruel alternative of either losing his moral sense or losing his respect of the law. These two evils are of equal consequence and it can be difficult for a person to choose between them. And that passage made me think that the law currently puts a doctor and patient in an untenable position, because they can either choose to live or choose to relieve suffering, or they can choose to follow the law. They can choose sickness and possibly even death, or going to jail. That's the untenable position. And the doctor has a Hippocratic oath to help his patients. The patient has a moral duty, as we all do, to stay alive and stay healthy. And I think passing 648 into the law would add some morality back into our law, and allow doctors to care for our sickest of patients, and it would send the message that our state does indeed respect the sickest of our neighbors and their doctors. So I do urge you to vote ought to pass on HB 648.
Thank you very much. Questions? Thank you. Sandy Drew.
She had to go to the doctor.
Okay, I'm going to come back to her. Representative Jackie Calicut.
Thank you. Representative Callie Pitts, Portsmouth and Newington. As a child of the 60s, I never thought I'd be up defending medical marijuana, because I have never smoked marijuana, and I have, however, I have been given almost every street drug legally that you can imagine. I had pancreatitis and almost died. I was in possession of quantities of OxyContin, Dilaudid, Vicodin that you wouldn't imagine. I have lost periods of my life that I will never get back because they affected my mind so much. At a hospital in Boston, one of the doctors said to me, have you ever considered smoking marijuana? Because some of the symptoms were that horrendous. And I said, absolutely not, because it's illegal. As I thought about, as I recovered, and it was a long process, I thought about my family, and that's what I would like to put it in the context. If I had someone in my family who was suffering, and there was something that I could do for that person, bar all kinds of studies, if I knew there was something that was going to help them, would I do anything that I could to get that for them? We talk about the FDA, and we know that the FDA is being revamped. They're going to look at the way they study drugs. Some of our wonder drug, aspirins, came from the bark of a tree. I think we need to allow people in their suffering. Is it going to happen today? We're going to pass a law tomorrow, you're going to grow 6 months of marijuana. I don't think so. There's going to have to be rules, there's going to have to be regulations, it has to be prescribed. But look at some of the drugs that are prescribed today for people that are lethal, that cause teenagers. You know, I thank God that my kids never went in my cabinets. And I really didn't know what I was taking either. Until I said, that's enough. That's enough. So let's do no harm. Let's try to do some good. And in the end, work out how we dispense it, because it doesn't seem to me that the problem is having it, using it, it works, it's been testified to. Let's work out the matter of safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt Simon?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Matt Simon. I am Executive Director of the New Hampshire Coalition for Common Sense Marijuana Policy. There's already been a lot of excellent testimony, so I'll be very brief. I do have a handout that's coming around. It's not my written testimony that I'm going to read. It's just some supplemental things that are there for you to refer to if you choose. There have been a few misconceptions that have come up over the last few months as I've been going around the state meeting with patients and citizens and talking about this legislation. Three of the common misconceptions that I'd like to touch on very briefly. One we've already heard is the conflict or discrepancy with federal law, and certainly I had never heard a state or local police officer say that state police enforce federal marijuana laws until today. That's the first time I've ever had that. Actually, the Controlled Substances Act, which is the operative federal legislation, is explicitly clear that federal laws and state drug laws are separate bodies of law, state police and local police. And I'm not a lawyer, but that's always been my understanding, and that's in the Controlled Substances Act, that states are free to set their own penalties. That has been tested, how far that can go, and no court has ever found that the medical marijuana laws on the books in 13 states, or for that matter, the decriminalization laws on the books on 12 states, that those violate federal law. States are free to set their own penalties, and if federal agents want to enforce federal law, they're still able to do so. That was clarified by a 2004 Supreme Court ruling for H.V. Gonzalez, which found that federal agents could continue to enforce federal law in a state like California if they chose to. That was in response to all these things that have happened in California. I think it's important to point out that California's law is very different than what we're talking about here. It allows for marijuana to be sold, storefronts, things that people in New Hampshire would be very uncomfortable with. And when I talk to people about this law, that's what leaps into their head. They think California, they've seen something on TV where there's a store selling marijuana, and that's the last thing they want. And that certainly isn't in this law. It's not in the laws in Vermont or Maine or any of the other states that have these types of things. I would say that if we want to a conflict, a true conflict with federal law would be on an issue. The issue that came to my mind was the Real ID Act, actually. The Real ID Act forces or mandates that states comply with federal standards for driver's licenses. And in New Hampshire, a lot of privacy advocates and a lot of people with different types of concerns got together and opposed that. And a couple of years ago, New Hampshire passed a law which expressly says New Hampshire will not participate in the terms of the Real ID Act. That is a conflict between federal law. It's a conflict that the state Senate passed, I believe, unanimously, and the government signed. It's a conflict that was seen to be in the best interests of citizens in the state. I would argue that this is no such conflict. There's definitely a discrepancy, but we can't change federal law. We can only in New Hampshire change the laws that state and local police enforce, and in reality, from a practical perspective, 99% of marijuana arrests are made by state and local police officers. The recent ruling, or the recent statements from Attorney General Holder and from the Obama administration, that really actually doesn't change policy that would affect New Hampshire. It definitely changes the policy in California. What they've said expressly is that from now on, only if people, and in this case it's the dispensaries in California, only if they break state law plus federal law will the federal government get involved. But in Vermont and Maine and all these other states, the federal government has never gotten involved. They've never raided patients. They've never threatened to do so. They've never said they would do so. And this quote that I've provided you, that I hope you have, clarifies that from the ONDCP's chief counsel. And for example, in 2006, New Mexico passed a medical marijuana law that attempted to give the government some, they wanted to have the health department growing and distributing marijuana, and that was ruled to be, that would be a violation of federal law. It would put state employees in the position of violating federal law, and that would be a problem. But simply allowing patients to grow a few plants in their closets is not going to invoke the wrath of the federal government. The patients are, I would not be supporting this law if I thought it was going to put any of these patients at the risk of having their doors broken down and having them harassed by federal agents. Certainly not. Some of the confusion about marijuana as medicine. Marijuana is a very unique substance. It was used as medicine from the mid-1800s to 1937, really, in the United States. It was produced by many pharmaceutical companies. The trouble was that they had difficulty making consistent medicines out of it. They couldn't figure out how to make a pill out of it. They couldn't figure out how to use their hypodermic needles and inject people as they could with opiates and cocaine. It frustrated them. So they made mainly tinctures, which were liquid versions of it, but they weren't very consistent. The other problem with marijuana is that when you ingest it orally, it takes anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour to kick in. And once you've taken, it's impossible to dose it once you've swallowed it. Now, there's no risk of overdose. There's no risk of something terrible happening to you. But you can experience the negative psychoactive effects that patients don't want if you eat too much or if you take too much Marinol. Inhaled marijuana is frankly the only way that many of these patients can titrate their doses, can get the right amount, and the onset of the relief is virtually instantaneous. And for a patient with nausea who can't swallow a pill, I mean, many of these situations, it's just very clearly the only thing that helps these people eat, drink, sleep, and that's what I hope the committee will remember. Finally, the excess marijuana. I've never tried to cultivate really anything. I had a spider plant once that I killed in a few months, but I've been reading about this for the last few months. I approached it from, all right, if I was a patient and I got on the internet, I'm going to try to grow marijuana, what would I have to do? It is actually more involved than, it's certainly not putting a plant on a table and a light over it and it's going to make marijuana. I mean, it's one thing to keep a plant alive and another thing to get it to produce usable marijuana. And patients in other states, there's a learning curve that takes place, and they're going to have to, in many cases, I believe they will struggle to cultivate an adequate supply for themselves. The idea that any of them would become involved in diverting or selling marijuana is just It's hard for me to imagine having met with dozens of these people in the last few months. And I don't think that's happening in states with laws like Vermont. I have a quote here from the Vermont police captain saying, at this point, 4 years into this, we're comfortable with what's happening, and we believe the people who are getting it under the true color of what the law is. I think that's what this law is about, and it's hard for me to sit and listen to people telling me that this is a legalization bill that's hiding something else. It's so clearly not that. It really is about these patients.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you, Professor. Senator Fuller-Clark. And then next will be Steve Steiner and Stephanie Murphy.
Good morning, Chairman Scabati and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Senator Martha Fuller-Clark. I represent District 24, which is the city of Portsmouth and the 7 surrounding communities on the seacoast. I appear before you today as a co-sponsor of House Bill 648FN. I know that you've already heard a great deal of testimony that has gone into detail about this legislation and the way it has been carefully designed. I would just encourage you to look at the bill that was filed 2 years ago and the bill that you are looking at today to see the enormous amount of thought and improvement that has gone into the crafting of this legislation that has provided a very narrow window of opportunity for chronically or terminally ill patients in New Hampshire in order to provide them relief by allowing them the use of medical marijuana. I am here today simply to say that I think that this is New Hampshire's opportunity to provide a compassionate approach to being able to treating those individuals who are so severely ill. My husband is a physician. He has seen patients in the past and talks about the type of suffering that they have had to go through when they haven't really had the opportunity to be able to access medical marijuana. I appreciate his expertise as a physician as well, and I'm here just today to say that I think this is an important, well-crafted and narrow piece of legislation, and I would urge the Senate to consider passage of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Thank you very much. Steve Steiner.
Good morning, Senators.
Steve, you are speaking in opposition to the bill.
I'm in opposition to this bill.
You've been waiting a long time. Thank you for your
Yes,
patience.
I have. The reason why I'm here for those kids. I'm here for those families that they've talked about, the ones they laughed about, that have to grow the marijuana for these patients. I've been an advocate since the death of my son. I've learned a lot about this movement. So when we talk about the drug legalization part of this, this is a drug legalization bill. Under this bill, I can go get medical marijuana. I have chronic pain in my knees from time to time. I can go get pot if I want to. So when they say that this bill is tightly knit and it's really, really tightened for people that are with chronic pain, I have chronic pain from time to time, I can get it. You know, when I was calling around and talking to some of the other senators, they were telling me this bill is for terminally ill people. It's not for terminally ill people, for people who want access to marijuana. I want to just, can I give this to you? This article is from a newspaper in Europe, from The Independent. It was one of those media outlets advocating for legalization of marijuana. And what they're finding is that one of the side effects of marijuana is schizophrenia and mental illness. So when you evaluate your so-called medicine, there is side effects. Quite frankly, some of the people who testified saying that your perception, your coordination increases while you're smoking pot and driving is appalling. Just got enough for everybody here. Okay. I want to talk about one other thing. I gave you another side effect, testicular cancer, that has been linked to marijuana use, which I think is important. What I want to add is, I guess now let's talk about the legalization aspect of this bill and who's behind it. And the gentleman before me, I believe, is from New Hampshire Common Sense. Okay, that organization is basically a front for the Marijuana Policy Project. I have papers here. I have a 990 that was filed for 2007 that shows a complete list of how much they've gotten from MPP and the other organizations throughout the country that we want to talk about. In fact, I also have the ballot initiative for Michigan. Now, none of the major medical associations that I can find, AMA, glaucoma folks, the MS folks, have come out against medical marijuana or crude marijuana. In fact, if you look at these here, 99% of the money going into Michigan for their initiative came from outside the state. They raised nearly $2 million, all coming from the Marijuana Policy Project, the organization that's funding the organization here in New Hampshire. In fact, the director of that organization is a convicted drug felon. And here's a copy of his arrest record. Now, I will admit that there are components in marijuana that can help you. They're called cannabinoids. We've talked about the opiates, we've talked about marijuana. They've been able to isolate those components in opiates, morphine in particular, as a pain medication. And since then, they've been able to synthesize that and make it into a standard dose. We have a company called GW Pharmaceutical on it, which you haven't heard about, by the way. I haven't heard anybody talk about GW Pharmaceutical or Sativex. This is a medication that's been approved in Canada, that's apparently going to get approved in the UK, has gone through the rigors of their process. And what they've been able to do is isolate those components called cannabinoids. And this is sprayed under the tongue. Of course, the advocates will say, oh, this is not fast enough. Well, this is where we put our nitroglycerin when we have a heart attack, right? We have a problem with our heart, we put it there. So it's pretty fast acting as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, I wish I could have showed you my PowerPoint. I emailed my PowerPoint to everybody. Unfortunately, not one senator has opened it yet. But you should open it up, because every speaker on that PowerPoint makes fun of the medicalization and wants to use the medicalization of marijuana to further the agenda of legalization. Even back just a few weeks ago at the Cato Institute, Rob Campia, which again is on tape, and I can direct you to his own testimony, where he came out and said that marijuana, he would prefer to, and I'm paraphrasing, I would prefer to have the FDA approve crude marijuana as medicine, so I don't have to spend my money lobbying legislatures, having to, his main objective was legalization. He said it's a political fight. Now here's someone that says, I'm for patients, but now it's a political fight. It's not about science, because he said it wasn't about science, it's about being a political fight. You have to, the senators have to really look at the whole picture here. Unfortunately, you're being sold a bag of goods that just isn't there. And again, here's the whole stack here, but this is every campaign contribution made in Michigan. The AMA hasn't made any contributions to medical marijuana. Just the advocates are trying to use this as a red herring for full legalization. And if Sativex is approved, which is phase 3 trials here in the US, it's something that's sprayed under the tongue. It's made from the crude plant. They've been able to genetically able to make the same strength and it's been approved by, I mean, they got the approval through the DEA, so that the idea that the DEA is trying to help people, that's not true. But common sense people see through the smoke and mirrors, and that's what you need to do. Okay?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephanie Murphy, and then Representative Valencourt after.
Thank you. I have some written testimony.
I do here.
Yeah.
SAT,
Okay, thank you. For the record, my name is Stephanie Murphy, and I live in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and I'm a medical student at Dartmouth Medical School. And you've heard a lot of the things that I had planned to say today. You've heard why these patients use marijuana. You've heard what kind of diseases that they use it for. But I would like to briefly address some of the points that were brought up about the FDA and FDA approval of marijuana. Basically, gaining approval from the FDA is a very long and a very expensive process. And since it's not, no one can patent marijuana, it's a natural plant, so nobody really wants to take it through that process. There's also political opposition to it, as I'm sure you're aware of. Basically, this falls into the category of similar to supplements or herbal medicines. It's not a prescription drug. Doctors would not be able to prescribe it under this law. They would only be able to recommend it, and then the patient would be responsible, as you've heard. And there are many dietary supplements that have benefits for health and are proven in studies. Calcium, vitamin D, fish oil, to name a few. So it's similar to those. And I would also like to address the issue of studies that have shown the safety and efficacy of marijuana. You've heard, and you will hear more anecdotal evidence about its use, but there are also randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials, and I've listed several of them in my written testimony. And if you are interested, you can go on a database such as PubMed or Medline and do a search for yourself. And what you will see is that the trials show that when patients use precisely controlled doses of marijuana, it is effective at relieving their pain, usually from neuropathic pain or pain from a nerve injury. And there are some trials for wasting diseases that show its efficacy at improving appetite as well. These are trials that are done in usually California or one in England that I cited here. And also, more importantly, these trials find no serious side effects. So the issue, even though it's very difficult for political reasons to gain approval from the DEA and to study marijuana in a medical setting, it has been done in states where there are medical marijuana laws in the books. And I hope these trials demonstrate to you that it is safe and effective in a scientific context. And I also am happy to take any questions. I know you've heard a lot of testimony. I just want to add my voice as someone who is in the medical profession, and I would like to say that when I become a physician, I would like to have the option of being able to recommend marijuana to patients who I think could really benefit from it out of compassion and out of motivation for wanting them to live pain-free. That's really what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for providing the resources for us. Any questions? Any questions? Representative Valencourt. And is Representative Heth still here? I'm sorry, I missed his.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Steve Valencourt. I represent Manchester Ward 8. I'm here to speak in favor of the bill, and the last hour I've spent in here, it's been very enlightening. I've learned a great deal today. This has been some of the best testimony I've ever heard. I've also learned that apparently people can go in on your computer after they've sent you stuff and see if you've opened it, which is an indication that Big Brother is not that far away. It's kind of frightening. I want to speak not as a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I don't understand how science works, but I do respect it. And I think today we're on the cusp of morality in science, and that's an important place to be. The evolution of this bill is also interesting. I sponsored this legislation almost 10 years ago when it was defeated. The Attorney General's office spoke about it being introduced before and being defeated. But of course, you realize that the reason it's before the Senate now is because it passed the House. When I introduced it about 10 years ago, it was defeated by 100 votes or so. A couple of years ago, it was defeated by a handful of votes. This time, it passed, not by a few votes, but by almost 100 votes. It passed by bipartisan support. I believe 45 Republicans, including some of the most conservative people in this House, supported this. So this has tremendous support. The sponsors of this bill deserve a tremendous amount of credit for bringing it into shape. As you know, 13 other states have done things like this, and the world hasn't ended there. So I would urge you not to be convinced by a lot of the smoke that has come forth on this bill to try to cloud the issue. I'm frankly surprised that the Attorney General would send somebody here to spread misinformation. And it seems to me it has to be deliberate when she tells you how much one of these plants will produce. I think she's off by about a factor of 100, because the best scientific evidence is that a plant produces about 4 ounces.
Miracle Grow.
I'd like to have her come and work on some of those tomatoes I bought on TV. We're told that you might over-medicate. That's just red herring. That's smoke and mirrors as well. We're told that this is unproven. However, at the same time, they say we don't need this because there's a marinol substance which is proven to be effective. So you can't have it both ways. Either there's a substance that's proven to be effective or there's not. This is about morality. Somebody earlier quoted about the law and how laws should be based on people's willingness to obey them. I like to quote a great scientist, Albert Einstein, who said that there's nothing more harmful to society than promoting laws which cannot be enforced. I used it on the 65-mile-an-hour speed limit bill. But that gets us to the heart of the issue. Should we have laws which are so universally ignored? As marijuana. When I was on the Ways and Means Committee, we learned that about 20% of people smoke cigarettes in this state, maybe a little down now. And at the same time, we got indications that about 10%, I don't know where they got this, but 10% of New Hampshire residents smoke marijuana. So half as many people as smoke cigarettes are smoking this illegal substance, which tells you that this is a substance which is going to be available for people to get. Don't ask me how, I don't know, but probably your sons and daughters can tell you how it's easily available. So don't be fooled by that. I think the most important point that was made today is that as far as other substances are concerned, this is more benign. If it can be helpful, fine. My mother died a terrible death about 25 years ago after abusing her body with alcohol and tobacco for a long time. She died of cancer of the liver and cancer of the intestine. And as Representative Callie Pitts noted, if there is anything I could have done to alleviate the suffering when she was on these medications that knocked her out completely, if this would have helped her, I would have said, God bless the people that make this and grow it. It would have been a benefit. I don't see anything wrong with this. In a just and in a moral society, we should go toward this means. And I urge you to do what the rest of the legislature has done, show that we're in an evolutionary process and that we change. Change is a wonderful thing, and we're on the cusp of some tremendous changes. So I wholeheartedly endorse this and ask you to make it. Could it be unanimous? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dennis Acton. And while Dennis is coming up, I would just like to note that Shannon Chandley is supporting the bill, Katrina Beck, Faith Cook, Representative Deborah Wheeler, Representative Barbara French, all in support of the bill but not wishing to speak. So I want to enter that into the record as well. Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Acton. I'm from Fremont, and I'll try to tell my story in 2 minutes, not 3, to make it quick. I do feel it's compelling, so I'm here for the first time speaking in public. But in 1998, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. I was a healthy 32-year-old. This was obviously a big shock for me. I had to go through painful surgery to remove a testicle, and then since there was a chance that the cancer may have spread into my lymph nodes in my abdomen, my doctor felt that I should go through a course of radiation treatment. Several weeks after the surgery, which was extremely painful, I wound up starting my radiation. During the first week, I was on a drug called compazine because the doctors gave me that knowing that I would be feeling nauseous very quickly. At first, since the effects of radiation are cumulative, the first week wasn't really that bad, but towards the end of the week I started really getting sick and I found that the compazine wasn't working. So I went to my doctor and asked, is there something that's more effective? And they put me on a drug called Zofran. I'm pretty sure it was called Zofran. The prescription for Zofran cost $1,600 for a 3-week supply. And I started taking that, but midway through my second week of treatment, I felt I'd gone from just a feeling of car sickness all the time to full-blown what I liken to seasickness. Anyone who's been on a whale watch or something knows how that feeling is, and it got worse and worse. The Zofran would take the edge off it, but I was still very sick. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping well, I couldn't work. At that point, a family friend came by who had survived cancer and provided me with a small amount of marijuana, which I began using. The effect was quite dramatic for me. I stopped taking the Zofran altogether, and during my third week of treatment, where I was getting shot up with huge doses of radiation right to my abdomen, I wasn't sick. And at a certain point in my final week, I was like, shouldn't I be more sick? Shouldn't I? I was told that I would be more ill, and I wasn't. And I'd never thought to use marijuana. It just wasn't in my mind. I thought it was something for people who were on heavy chemotherapy and people who had far worse conditions than me. But all I can say is that the small amount of marijuana that was given worked very effectively for me. I still have the bottle of Zofran somewhere in my house I never wound up using. And I used probably altogether less than an ounce of marijuana, and I was able, in the final week, I was able to return to work. I made sure that I didn't drive under the influence or anything like that, and people who drive me around. When I used smoked marijuana, I felt the nausea just kind of drain out of me. It was like stepping onto solid land from being seasick on a boat. It was that effective, and I found that if I ate it, it would last long. I would have longer lasting relief from the effects of nausea. And once I finished the treatment, the effects gradually disappeared over those 2 weeks, and I didn't need any more medicine at all, and that was my experience. So I just wanted to let you guys know that medicinal marijuana did work for me. I was nervous about it. I didn't think it would, and it did. And so that's basically my experience I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you.
All right. All set.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, Claire Evil.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Claire Evil. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Civil Liberties Union. And despite the length and the breadth of this hearing, what the Senate has before it is a very simple bill. The people who have come here to describe their use of an illegal substance ought not to be criminalized. They are your constituents, they are your neighbors, and they are your friends. But they are treated as criminals under current New Hampshire law. You have the power to change that, and you should. The history of marijuana in this country is an interesting one. It was legal, fully legal, until 1937. It became illegal after the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th, when the liquor distributors discovered that they had lost 3 million of their customers who switched from what was illegal alcohol to legal marijuana. And they created as a political piece Reefer Madness, and for those of you old enough to remember it, it's worth a review. They gave it to Congress to convince Congress that the demon weed was the path to hell and that it needed to be criminalized, but it was a marketing tool to put alcohol back in the homes of the people who were legally smoking marijuana. That's the history of the demonization of marijuana. But what you have here is, it's a complete smokescreen. This is not a legalization bill. That's already been to the House this year and it was defeated. But as Representative Valancourt pointed out, this bill passed overwhelmingly. because the House recognized, as I hope the Senate will, that you are talking about your constituents who lead good and noble lives, who observe the law and value the law, but they value their lives more, and they resort to a substance that gives them ease and gives them the ability to continue when no other substance does. It is a very simple process. You've heard about the FDA, and I think, bless the medical student who came up from Dartmouth, down from Dartmouth, I guess, because the process of having something approved by the FDA is all about money. It's not about the safety of the drug. Some of you are old enough, as I am, to remember thalidomide. We're not talking about the necessity of drug safety. We are talking about being able to get a patent on a particular prescriptive medicine, which, since it is a natural product, as she pointed out, you cannot do. You have heard that the drug laws in the state will be compromised if you decriminalize marijuana for medical use. Our neighbors in Maine and our neighbors in Vermont have not found that to be the case, nor have the other 12 states that have decriminalized marijuana for medical use. The issue that you're facing is a simple one, and Attorney General Holder made it simpler still. He said that the federal government will not enter any state to prosecute if the state laws permit the use of medical marijuana. Now, granted, he's not going to be Attorney General for the rest of our lives, but he's there probably for 4 years and maybe for 8. And being Irish, I don't gamble, but I do predict sometimes. And it is my belief that by 2016, there will be a majority of the states of the United States that have approved marijuana for medical use. I would like New Hampshire to be lucky 14, and I thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Richard Craig.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Richard Craig Jr., and I'm the Chief of Police in the town of Enfield. I'm a law enforcement officer of 21 years, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police, who strongly oppose this legislation. Marijuana is a recreational drug, not medication. There are numerous studies that show the dangers of marijuana. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, studies show that someone who smokes 5 joints per week may be taking in as many cancer-causing chemicals as someone who smokes a full pack of cigarettes every day. Preparing for this bill, my staff and I took out 2 ounces of tobacco, and this is what a representation of 2 ounces of marijuana would be in joints. And there's 113 marijuana joints that were rolled here. So we're not talking about a very, when we think of 2 ounces, we think of a small quantity. When we're talking about marijuana, this is a large quantity. And this is what somebody's going to be able to possess with them at any time under this legislation, along with 6 marijuana plants. The original bill, during the study committee that was tightening it up, went from 12 plants to 6 plants. And that's something that I'm very happy to see. They tightened it up. This legislation still has a long way to go to tighten up. And as it stands right now, we feel that it's not adequate to address the concerns that have been placed before here, and that we see, whether Senator Downing asked the trooper earlier regarding the testing for drug testing for truck drivers. Under this legislation, I don't believe that somebody who is a truck driver, that they would not be that they would be in conflict with that driving law. Also, it talks in the legislation, in the bill, about testing somebody. So if we have somebody that's impaired and is driving under the influence of marijuana, that there's a clause in here that will not allow for that to be admissible in court. So there is still a lot of work that needs to be done on this considerably, let alone the fact that I think very strongly that medicine needs to be studied and it needs to be approved through the process that we have set up in this country, and that's through the Food and Drug Administration. They look at the effects that it's going to have. Will the patients benefit, and will that benefit outweigh the damage to the remainder of society? Oftentimes, the risk is too great, even though a small group will benefit from medication. The risk is too great to allow that drug to be produced and sent out for doctors to prescribe. In this situation, I think the risk is too great. We have a huge drug problem in our state. We have a drug problem with prescriptions being diverted to illegal use right now. And we have a problem with marijuana with kids. And we cannot take this stand to have children believe that marijuana will help people, that it's a medicine. It's not. And that's why the federal government hasn't changed at this point in time. And I'll take any questions if you have.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. Stephanie Murphy? Stephanie Murphy here?
She already spoke.
Oh, okay. And Peter Smith has signed up in support but not wishing to speak. Ellie Carpentino from the New Hampshire Police Association has signed up in opposition but not wishing to speak. Richard Vincent, wishing to speak. Is Richard Vincent still here?
I believe he had to leave.
Oh. I think he's right behind you.
He's here.
Richard, welcome. And also, while he's coming up, Representative Scott Merrick signed up in support of the bill, but not wishing to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am here. My name is Richard Vincent. I run the support group here in Concord, New Hampshire, at Health South for the National MS Society. I have 30 people on my mailing list. I call them victims. We're all victims of MS. Some use various treatments. Some use various drugs. Some don't use any treatments at all and just sort of float along and deal with the MS the way they can. I feel that the passage of this bill doesn't make this into a Woodstock reunion. I think that if cannabis, and I use the word cannabis, I don't like marijuana, it sounds, very apprehensive. Cannabis is what it was called many years ago anyways. And people in the group, some people, matter of fact, some of the people are in this room, have told me that they've used it in the past and it has worked as far as reducing the spasms on their leg. And what I would suggest is that support of this bill would help all these people as far as helping them with their treatment of MS. It's an option that they could use. That's all I'm looking at is an option that they can use. I have one gentleman in the support group that uses V-sting therapy, which is really not my cup of tea, but it worked for him. It's an anecdotal thing, and frankly, using marijuana or cannabis could be anecdotal as well. As far as everybody in the group, not everybody in the group's for using this because they're worried about an arrest. And after some of the testimony I heard from one gentleman, one arrest was not a very nice thing to go through. Anyways, I'm just asking you to support this bill. The House has already supported the bill, and I'd like the Senate to do the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. So, Bob Blaisdell. And I'm also going to just announce a few more speakers or people not wishing to speak, but Philip Cohn in support of the bill, but not wishing to speak. Chris Heffernan also in support. Dennis Goddard, Ron Hewlett, and Cassidy Nicosia, all in support of the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Bob Blaisdell. I'm a lobbyist here in Concord, with a firm by the name of the Demers Group. And I appear before you today representing MPP, which is the Marijuana Policy Project based out of Washington, D.C. I had my testimony all set, ready to go. I'm not going to even get into my testimony today, because there's been numerous things that have been stated that I'd like to speak about and clarify. There was a gentleman here earlier from, I believe, the state police mentioning that this causes accidents, and this meaning marijuana. If I could just call to your attention, starting on the bottom of page 9 of the bill. It's going into the factors that, things that you can't do if you're going to be a patient, and if you don't want to be prosecuted. Going on to page 10, it specifically states that you cannot operate, navigate, or be in actual physical control of any motor vehicle, aircraft, motorboat, etc. So you will not receive the protections given to you as a patient under this bill, should you be doing any of those things. So I think that's important to remember here, that we're not trying to give anybody a free pass or free ride here. These are seriously ill people who just want to do what's best for their own condition. Senator Downing earlier mentioned about the truckers. I think he referenced line 5 of page 5, and I think this section that I referenced on page 9 and 10 hopefully would adequately answer that concern. His other concern was about money being in jeopardy, being brought to the state from the federal government. And, you know, I don't have an answer for that, but I would just guess, based on the current administration's current comments regarding this issue, that I think it would conflict if they were going to choose to withhold those funds. The gentleman from the state police also mentioned problems in other states. He did not mention which states. I can guess probably, I'm assuming he's probably only referring to the state of California, which I think we would all agree in this room that there's some problems out there. We do not want to be California here in New Hampshire. That's not what we're about. That's not what this bill is about. I would just ask, you know, we are surrounded by, you know, Vermont and Maine that have similar bills, similar laws on the books. And I have never heard anything of any outrageous things by patients in those states. I just don't think there's going to be the problem that was stated. In all due respect to the woman testifying on behalf of the Attorney General's office, I respectfully completely disagree with some of her comments. One being the yield of marijuana plants. I have some information for you here that I'm going to pass out in a little bit for you to take a look at. And if I could just stop for a minute and just say, I think one of the most important pieces of this legislation, in terms of from your view, is education. I can tell you from a personal perspective, when I first got the phone call from MPP last November, if I would represent them, my first indication was, I don't think so. I'm not comfortable with this. I don't think this is my issue. And part of my responsibilities with the firm that I work for is to do extensive research on potential clients. And so I did the necessary research, and as I went through that, I found myself becoming more educated, more comfortable with this issue. So I went from one extreme to the other, where at the end of the day, my personal belief, my personal thoughts were, this makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. So again, there's a lot of stuff to go through here, and I've separated it by different categories. One of which is the testimony of Dr. Joseph McSherry from Vermont. extremely, extremely credible individual, which I'm hoping next week, he can't make it here today. He's going to try and meet with you or speak to you over the phone about this issue. He is just a wealth of knowledge on this issue in terms of how it's working in Vermont. He served on the study committee in Vermont with the judge, with the Attorney General's office, with police officers. And again, like you hear about all these studies that are being referenced here today. There are over 3,000 studies that have been done on this. So sure, I could pick out of a hat, this is against, this is for. I think what's important to remember is not all these studies that you could spend hours and hours and weeks going through. It's the personal stories of these individuals that have come here today. They had the courage to tell you their story and how this bill would help their lives, their families. One thing to keep in mind is when you're dealing with these other drugs that you could be getting from the pharmacy, oftentimes in these situations, you are incoherent. You are a zombie. And some of these people, I don't know if the gentleman that has, that spoke earlier, when he found out the terrible news when he was 32 years old, I don't know if he has a family or not, but if he did, let's just say for a minute he did, and he wanted to spend time with his family and his kids, play with his kids. If you're incoherent on the couch, on some God knows what type of medication you're on, marijuana doesn't do that to you. It doesn't make you incoherent. It's about the quality of life of your constituents and the people of this state that I think we need to focus on. Mr. Steiner mentioned earlier that under this bill, he could get pot. That's true, actually. If you go to page 2, line 2, he would have to demonstrate to his doctor, with his severe pain, that it has not responded to previously prescribed medication. Okay? So essentially, the medication the doctor thought that would help his knee problem wasn't working, or any surgical measures. And this is within a time span of 3 months. So yeah, if a professional doctor, a licensed doctor, thought that all these other medications weren't working, then sure, he could get it. Realistically, I don't think he's going to. I think everybody in this room knows he's not going to get it due to a knee problem. This is about seriously ill patients. Let's not forget that. Let's not try and manipulate this to the point where we're talking about knee problems. He mentioned that the AMA and other associations have not endorsed medical marijuana. That may be true. I have not seen any documentation saying they are in opposition to medical marijuana. I think it's important to note that. You can't have, you just can't mention that they haven't endorsed it without saying that they also haven't come out in opposition. I'm almost done, Madam Chair. My client was mentioned, MPP, earlier by Mr. Steiner, about the founder being a convicted felon. That is true. His name is Rob Campion. I met Rob last November, and he told me his story. When that happened to Rob, he was an honor student at Penn State University. He was growing his own marijuana, and he served 3 months. After he got out of jail, he went back to school and became student body president. He's a motivated individual to do what's right and what he believes is right in terms of drug legislation, drug laws. Last I checked, there's nothing wrong with people having associations, spending money on various projects. It was inferred that it was a negative that all this money went here or there. This is America, this is New Hampshire, I don't see a problem with that. It's all legit, it's all, he found all the documents, there's nothing wrong with that. So I hope you wouldn't think that there's something wrong with my client, MPP. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to give out this information, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. And certainly, please use me as a resource as we move forward through the process.
Thank you very much. Any specific questions? Not at the moment.
May I leave
You
these?
can just give those to Kathy.
Okay.
She will make sure all members get them
Thank you very much.
as well. Susan Bruce. And while Susan was coming, I also had Don Peterson sign up in support of the bill, but not speaking.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
And I actually have very short testimony. You haven't heard this before. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's especially nice to see my state senator here on the committee. My name is Susan Bruce, and I'm here today and testify, let me take off my glasses so I can see. I'm here today to testify in favor of HB 648 on behalf of my husband, David Emerson. David can't be here today because he's in the hospital, where he has been for nearly 2 weeks now. David is a terminal cancer patient with multiple medical problems. In 2006, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the blood plasma and bone marrow. He also has heart disease, kidney disease, which was caused by the drugs given to him for his heart condition, and diabetes, which was caused by the massive doses of steroids that are part of his chemo. The cancer weakens his bones. In 2007, he had to have a hip replaced because it was so riddled with tumors that it cracked. He's broken ribs at least 40 times. A radiologist recently described his ribs as looking like Swiss cheese. Right after Christmas, he had to have a titanium infrastructure fused into his spine because his cervical vertebrae had been so compromised by cancer that his head was in danger of falling off. Literally. I know how that sounds. It sounds really dramatic, and it was. It was really scary at the hospital for a while there. The surgery was followed by a course of radiation that was so debilitating that he refused to finish the treatments. Because of the radiation, everything he ate or drank tasted of sheet metal, and this condition is only now just starting to go away. He needs to keep his blood sugar level on an even keel, which means eating regularly. He also needs to stay hydrated because he has blood drawn at least once a month, and his veins are so overused that they're terrible. The sheet metal taste wasn't conducive to eating or drinking. David has a lot of pain and stress in his life. He asked me to tell you that one of the few things that eases this stress is the occasional use of marijuana. Marijuana also helped give him an appetite to eat and drink foods that tasted like sheet metal after the radiation. David Emerson is a respected historian, author, genealogist, librarian, and member of his community. I tell you this only so that you won't be able to stereotype him as a typical pothead. When I met him in 2000, he didn't smoke marijuana. With all of his medical problems, he pushes himself to go to work 20 hours a week to keep his health insurance benefits. That's profoundly wrong too, but that's not what we're here to discuss today. I know that some of you are concerned about sending a message, a kind of wrong message to kids about drug use. I have an entirely different worry. I worry that we send a message that it's okay to be uncaring and unsympathetic to the pain and suffering of chronically and terminally ill people. We treat our sick pets better than we treat our sick people. I find the lack of compassion to be a disturbing message to pass on to our young people. David asked me to say one more thing, and this is a direct quote. Anyone who believes that medical marijuana should not be legalized should come and lie beside me in my bed and hold my hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that. Please wish him our best.
Thank you.
Darlene Wilson?
She had to leave.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen Converse? Kathleen here?
She left.
Connor Quimby? Okay. I'm sorry, not speaking but supporting the bill. Stacy Clark?
Not speaking.
Okay, not speaking and supporting. Brian Marvin is not speaking but supporting the bill as well. Clayton Holton. Is Clayton here? Okay, and let me just, Clayton comes up. Brian Holton is supporting the bill but not speaking, as is Elena Asbury. Carrie James, Richard Pinchel, Anthony Jemaine, all supporting the bill but not speaking. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Clayton Holton, and I'm first must say it's a lot easier speaking in front of 3 of you instead of 20 the other time. I have very bad anxiety and heart problems, along with a very rare form of muscular dystrophy. About a week ago, I actually had to go to the emergency room because my heart rate jumped from a normal 60 to 80 beats per minute to 210. It's called a supraventricular tachycardia. It's an extremely long name, I know. But the only way to stop it is an injection through an IV that literally stops your heart, and it feels like someone's stabbing you in it. It's caused from a chemical imbalancement in your heart, and it is one of the things I suffer from because of my condition. I've recently been put on new medication for it, which I'm not comfortable about. I've been off of new drugs for the last 5 years. I've been off of narcotics for around the same amount of time. I've been on every type there has been, and none of them seem to work. I lived in a hospital for 3 months where I took the advantage of being in a safe environment to have access to all these medications that they said that would replace the marijuana. And I took it, and instead of helping, I was forced to lay in bed for many, many days. I did get to travel to California and see how they had their system set up out there for medical cannabis. And it's 3,500 miles away. We're the exact opposite of California. Their dispensaries are corrupt. They use the patients, and that is not something that I would personally allow to happen in the state. I was born and raised here, and I do not want to move for my medicine. I have to eat, or sadly I will die. There is no treatment for my condition, and it's progressively getting worse. There's not a lot I can say that you haven't heard today, other than you've heard testimonies from both sides, for it and against it, and you have to make your own decisions, like everyone else. And I just hope that you find people like me aren't really criminals. We just want relief.
Thank you very much. Questions? I do have one. So you've experienced sort of the California system, and it's. Do you feel that there are adequate protections in this bill to prevent it from becoming? Are you familiar enough with the details
yes,
of this bill?
I know the bill in California and the bill here in New Hampshire. There is a lot of differences. One is the number of plants. In California, it's allowed 12. Here is 6. You're allowed, I believe, 3 to 4 ounces on you in California, which is way more than you need. Personally, because of my condition, I go through about 1 ounce to 2 ounces a month. That's to keep me out of pain, eating, and comfortable. Was there anything else that you...
No, I was just curious as to what you thought were the important differences between that bill and this one.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can you just say that again? So if you use 2 ounces a month, and was it the police chief who had 2 ounces was 130 to 137? Is that what we're talking about?
No, it is not. And Sadly, it's something I have to do every month. I have to legally purchase an ounce for myself. And it looks nothing like those bags. It's a lot smaller than that. I do, because of my lung capacity, I have a 6-inch indent in my chest from having no muscles. So I cannot use marijuana cigarettes. I have to use a glass pipe. One thing I forgot to mention was I've been caught by officers multiple times. I say at least 10, 20 times. Easy. Never once have I been arrested. They take one look at me in my electric wheelchair that I used to be in. I got hit by a car in one, and that's a different story, but they take one look at me, they take one look at my condition, they see the size of my arms and just how sick that I look. They tell me to be careful and have a good day. They see that I'm not in pain, that I'm not in suffering.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and for sharing that with us. Let's see. Catherine Briskin.
To a few now.
Well, but off to other meetings, so, but we promise we will share the information with them.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, my name is Catherine Grisendine, and I live in Laconia. In 1996, I was living in Manchester, married with 2 young boys, and I began experiencing mysterious pains and eventually was diagnosed with several ailments, including fibromyalgia, which is a disease that deteriorates the muscle and the tissue that's in the ligaments that are attached to the bone. Degenerative disc disease, scoliosis, 4 bulging discs, carpal tunnel in both hands, sciatica in both legs, irritable bowel syndrome, insomnia and chronic fatigue, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. I had all that, and it took quite a few doctors to figure that out. Anyway, the years of living and working with these medical conditions took a toll on my health, and eventually I was forced to leave my data entry job with the U.S. Post Service and obtain Social Security disability benefits. I had become incapacitated to the point where I could not walk. I could not care for myself, and I could not care for my family. My husband had to carry me to the bathroom, and he had to hold me up while I used the toilet, and he also had to shower and dress me. While my husband worked, my 6-year-old son had to take care of his 2-year-old brother and his mom. I could not climb the stairs or walk, so the dining room was turned into a bedroom for me, where I stayed for 10 weeks. I squirmed in excruciating pain because of muscle spasms every minute, all day and all night. I went to 22 doctors and specialists and tried many kinds and combinations of prescription drugs, designer drugs, but they didn't work, and none addressed the chronic pain of muscle spasms. I was denied any type of opiate treatment, and I thought about suicide. Then one day a sympathetic friend came to visit, lit up a joint and handed it to me, and I was hesitant. But then I thought about the doctors not being able to help me after months of trying, so why not? Within 3 minutes, I felt my muscles start to relax to a point of relief I had not felt in months. Within 20 minutes, my arms and legs were able to be where I could have minimal movement with minimal pain. And I cried because I finally found something that helped me, and it worked immediately. So this was a turning point for me, because this is when I went from a patient in need to now being considered a criminal. I found a new doctor, rheumatology specialist number 23. I trusted him enough to tell him I was self-medicating with marijuana, and I credited it with easing my pain. Not all, but a good portion of it. He understood and was not surprised. He explained that in my case, my body does not produce enough endorphins on its own to deal with the amount of chronic pain that I have to live with because disease has changed the chemical and anatomical makeup of my spine. Because I trusted my doctor, I felt I could confide in him, and it turned out he was able to work with me because he was knowledgeable about marijuana benefits. But he was also concerned because it didn't address every medical issue I had, but he was able to prescribe the other medications I needed. Most importantly, he worked with me, a true doctor relationship, you know. While he couldn't endorse my marijuana use and always chose his words carefully, he at least understood how it helped me. And this is why I believe it's important that doctors are involved with the supervision and working with their patients, because patients go in and they don't want to admit to their doctors what they're doing because they're afraid that somehow they're going to get arrested because somebody's going to tell on them that they self-medicate. So a lot of people don't say anything. They don't tell their doctor. But when you tell your doctor and you work with your doctor, he's able to say, like in my case, well, you smoke. He checked me for vitamin B12 deficiency, and I had a deficiency. He checked me for other things to go along with the symptoms I had, and yet he was able to medicate around my use. He couldn't endorse it, but he understood it, and he worked with me. My recovery was slow, and I was able to participate in physical therapy to regain some mobility and muscle control. I basically had to learn how to walk again. And as long as I could smoke a small amount 2 or 3 times a day, I could move and I could start to get back some quality of life. And that was very important to me, especially with small children, that I could get up and help take care of them. In 1998, we moved to Laconia, and reluctantly, I had to find a new doctor. Number 24 turned out to be just as wonderful as number 23. And for the first time in years, my quality of life improved, and I continued to discreetly self-medicate. Then in 2002, I was arrested for small possession of marijuana. And I tried to explain about my medical condition, but it didn't matter. And I was guilty, I was convicted, and I was fined. Now I am a criminal. And I don't want to go into details, but I was treated like a criminal at the school and at other places where I shouldn't have had to endure being treated like a criminal. I've always been afraid to speak in public about this issue, and I'm really nervous about being here today. And believe me, my husband didn't want me to get involved and doesn't want my name or picture involved with anything because, like many people, he feels it's okay to support my marijuana use, but he doesn't want me to get involved, just remain one of the silent majority. He's afraid, as I am, that I may be targeted for arrest, and he asked me to please rethink becoming an outspoken advocate. But I faced him with tears in my eyes, and I said, honey, do I look like a criminal to you? Do I do anything in my life to live like a criminal other than this? I don't want it to be that way. We are the faces of the patients, and we are very real, and we're very afraid to come out and speak. We're very afraid to be heard. But I'm here today while I can still stand on my own 2 feet. I'm glad that you're able to listen. I did hear some of the other comments before me, and I had made a couple of notes about some things that I thought were important to mention. I have teenage boys. My youngest one, I will admit, he questions it for the wrong reasons, but my oldest one, who's now 20, he remembers having to pick his mom up off the floor when I fell down. and taking care of his younger brother. Education with our children is important. After I was arrested, I had to explain to my son what happened to me. And it was the first time he became aware that his mom smoked marijuana. But I didn't want to lie to him because I felt that lying would just perpetuate more lies and that he wouldn't be able to trust me in any issue that I ever talked to him about again if I lied to him about this. There's a difference between medical patients smoking for medicinal purposes and teenagers who smoke for recreational purposes. They get the euphoric high. They do the silly, stupid things. Somebody like me who uses it as medicine, it helps to motivate me. It helps to ease up my muscles so now that I can do my dishes in the morning. I can carry half a basket of laundry. I can carry half a thing of, it's like everything has to be downsized in my house. But in order to make me productive, and I need this. I need this every day. And I don't want to get off track here. One of the other things I noticed was that you were talking about how do you identify people who have this privilege. On our driver's license, we have a handicap chair logo for people who are handicapped. We also have a little heart shape for people who are organ donors. Why can't we have something to signify that we are a medicinal patient? Something along that line. And when it comes to where we're going to find this marijuana, let's be honest, a lot of people aren't going to know how to grow it. And it is not as easy as a house plant. It's much more difficult. And when I see on the news recently about all of the drug raids, with all of this marijuana that's being confiscated, I wonder, why can't there be a program set up where instead of the people who grow it being made into criminals themselves and being put into prison, why can't they be given a license to become a legitimate farmer? And why can't that marijuana, that instead of is being destroyed, why can't that be turned around and put into some type of a resource for patients who really can't grow it on their own? There's people who can't grow houseplants. There's people who won't be able to do it. They'll need to get it somewhere, and where will they get it from? Yes, the other patients. But I also see on the news that our state is throwing away a lot that could be used for benefit. And I'd like to see that worked into the program too. But
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Maury Martin.
was afraid of that.
Good afternoon.
I'm here today as a single parent of 2 children that has
Maury,
five
could
of
you just introduce yourself for
My
the
name is
record?
Maury Martin from
Thank you.
Belknap County. I'm here as a single parent of 2 children with fibromyalgia amongst other serious ailments. I'm supposed to have surgery on my back, but due to replacement and my disability, I will not be able to heal. So I am in chronic pain for the rest of my life. I have been medicating now for 13 years, and there should be proof that there are responsible young adults that can be active in their communities. My daughter is now 19 in the Army, and my son is 14 with good grades and currently holding a blue belt in karate. Education of our children is most important. With that, I taught them they choose to say, well, what I choose to say when it comes to peer pressure, they know how to say no. For they are aware that the effects of those who use it for recreational use. They know I am not one of them. I never medicated in front of my children, but was honest and seems firsthand that Mom was being able to do the dishes or make it to the field as assistant coach in cheerleading. So my daughter won 2nd place in nationals. I was also
very active in the schools, helping show support for my children's education. Because of this education I provided, my children are making the right decisions and have high goals and standards in their lives. As for me, I'm continuing my education that was put on hold, and I plan to have a good job in the medical field. I was once a computer instructor for the disabled. My disease gave in and I can no longer stand to take my 2-hour classes I was supposed to give. So now I must find a field that my disease will allow me to conduct a 40-hour work week. I'm also learning about herbs, and I've been able to get off of a lot of prescription drugs by using St. John's wort as an antidepressant, devil's claw as an anti-inflammatory, valerian root for nerve damage, among many others. Marijuana is just another herb that is needed in my life as a pain relief, not a C2 drug that has left me in a fog. I've heard some here, but there's many more that I've been through, and they do leave you very drowsy, and I don't want to be a couch mom. I want to be out there with my children living their lives. I am not a criminal, nor do I wish to be. I take my herbal supplements as a matter, it's just a matter of East Coast medicine versus West Coast medicine. Yes, there is a problem because they are crowding our jails with people who use medicinal, for medicinal. That's why I never did orals in college. Wasting tax dollars instead of going after the real criminals. I spoke to my daughter on Easter in Kansas. She asked me why not move back to California or Vermont, where it is legal. My reply was that this is a live free or die state, and most of all, I taught you, my child, to stand up for what is truly and morally correct. Besides, New Hampshire is one of the best places to raise a family. School systems here are great. For thousands of years, archaeologists have found marijuana on bones excavation sites. Before there were FDAs, people have had the knowledge of herbal remedies. I have comments on the weight and use of those who are not patients are truly naive. To these facts, I believe an anonymous survey should be taken on these facts and not arrested for being truthful. On another note, I do not suffer from schizophrenia, nor do I have any mental illness, other than depression for when I cannot care for my child. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for waiting so long. Okay, Mark Borden?
He's no longer here.
Okay, Mark was the last speaker. Is there anyone else that I missed?
Hello, thank you. My name is Sandra Drew, and I am a marijuana user because I have multiple sclerosis. And I have had it for 19 years. I'm 30, let me go back. I'm a 56-year-old retired nurse. And I've seen both sides of the spectrum with pain relievers and with marijuana. And in order for me to survive at night, I have severe muscle spasms, and I have pain in both legs, in both feet. And so traditional medication does nothing but make me dopey and gives me nightmares at night. And so I also have tried herbal medications that works good, and I've also a Reiki therapist, and which is fine. However, I can't stand on my head to put my hands on my feet to relieve the pain. So I have lived in New Hampshire for 35 years, and I've worked and been a productive adult. But now I'm in this wheelchair, and I hate being in this wheelchair more than anything. But in order for me to survive, I need to use medical marijuana. And that's all I want to say. And it's lunchtime, so I'm sure everybody wants to.
Thank you, Sandra. With that, I'm going to close the hearing on,
Senator Scambani, would you
Yes.
just register me as favoring the bill?
yes, I will, Representative. So I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 648 and thank people for their time and patience, and we made it through.
Yeah, I was.